Okay, we should be live now, Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
How are you doing today?
Well, I'm very interested and very absorbed by the news in our rapidly collapsing kingdom, because we're going to discuss all this in more detail. But
yeah,
I think
two Brexit live streams in a row.
Well, indeed. But as I said, we live in interesting times here in Britain,
yeah.
as the Chinese curse famously says.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So let's wait for everyone to join us before we get rolling, Alexander, with the topic at hand. All right, guys, if you can see me, if you can hear me, if you can see Alexander and you can hear Alexander, let us know. MPC 314 says, I can see Alexander and Alex. Great. Youngblood says, good evening. Nigel says, London calling. Yes, London is calling. Boy, is it calling.
It certainly is, yes.
Yeah, it really is. Let's see, Doris. Hi from Cyprus. All right, Doris, how are you doing? Johnny, quite a few Welsh on here. Awesome to hear. Hey, Noreen, how are you? London, a lot of people from London, from Toronto. Oh my God, Alexander, we also got to cover the Canadian elections.
Oh, indeed, very soon.
21st.
Yeah, 20,
and Obama, isn't it odd that Obama has endorsed Trudeau, but has not endorsed Biden?
Well, it is.
What does that tell you?
Well, it tells you an awful lot, actually. It tells you a huge amount. It tells you volumes. There's a famous. I'm sorry to quote this now, but there's a famous speech by a Roman senator called Gracchus, who once said that, what I say, people pay me for. What I don't say, they pay me even more for. So there you go. So it tells you absolutely it's hugely consequential. My own personal view, by the way, and there's been we want to deal with Brexit, but quickly on Biden. There's a very interesting article on the Daily Caller. I don't know if you saw it, about the various financial dealings that Hunter Biden has been involved in. And I personally suspect that at some point fairly soon, Joe Biden will pull out of the race.
Oh yeah,
that's. I think we're probably only weeks away, even perhaps days away from that.
All right. Well, let's see. We have Will. How you doing over there, Mr. M from Devon, UK. Faris of Arabia. Yellow from London. Let's see where else. Let's chat from Slovenia. Veronica from New York. Elisa from Stockport. All right, Alexander, let's get rolling. Hello to Croatia. How are you guys doing in Croatia?
Yeah.
Alexander, this is, we said a lot of things yesterday on the live stream with Brexit, and now we have some outcomes, some results as to what's going on. Yeah. So what a shocking day. What a stunning day.
An extraordinary day.
I don't even know what to say, an extraordinary day.
Okay,
so just take us into it, Alexander. The floor is yours.
I think the first point to make is that once again, we are in huge uncharted legal territory. And once again, the Remainer majority in the House of Commons, assisted by the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, are attempting to derail a Brexit deal by acting in a way which only a year ago, would have been considered unconstitutional, because once again, for the third time this year, Bercow, as Speaker, has set aside Standing Order number 14, which gives government business priority over other business, in order to allow Oliver Letwin, who is a Conservative MP, former Conservative MP, I think he's a former Conservative cabinet minister. And by the way, at one point, Margaret Thatcher's own policy guru in Downing Street. We're going back to the 1980s now. But he's an arch Remainer and a fierce opponent of Boris Johnson. There's a great deal of dislike between the two. Anyway, he's now put forward a proposal which says that the vote today, even if it had gone Boris Johnson's way, would have had no legal effect. The only way there would have been any legal effect would have been after the entire legislation to implement this deal had been passed. And he is saying on the strength of this, that since there is no parliamentary approval for this deal. That means that the Ben Letwin law, which he largely drafted, is now in effect, and Boris Johnson must write to the leaders of the European Union this evening to get them to agree to an extension of 3 months until the 31st of January. That's what he's saying. Boris Johnson has said quite clearly that he will not do that. So he is defying the Remaining majority in Parliament, and for their part, they are refusing to allow Boris Johnson's deal to be put to the vote. It gets even more extraordinary because the Speaker, John Bercow, is apparently now broadly hinting that he will not allow the government to proceed with the legislation to implement the deal if the government puts it forward on Monday, which is again something that no speaker has ever done. So, you know, we are looking at the most extraordinary situation, something which, as I said, if you'd asked me whether we would be in this situation a year ago, I would have said is inconceivable, but it shows you the extraordinary lengths that some people are prepared to go to.
Okay, let me see if I got this down, Alexander.
Well,
okay, let me see if I got this down, and then you could comment on it. Okay, so the Remainers, in essence, the Remainers are the people that don't want this, let's call it a soft Brexit, Boris's deal to go through. They've put a stop to it. They've delayed it, and they're saying to Boris, you know what? You have to go now and ask for a 3-month extension. Otherwise, there's no vote for this deal. Forget about it.
Yes.
So they're telling Boris, ask for that extension.
Yes.
The EU has said unanimously, from what I understand, we will not give an extension.
Right.
Boris Johnson has said, I will not ask for an extension. The 31st of October is what now? 10 days away, 11 days away?
Yep. It's looming hard.
So is there a paradox here in that the Remainers,
no,
the people are trying to keep the UK inside of the EU, are actually forcing it into a hard Brexit? Is that a correct way of looking at this? Or are they actually forcing it to a second referendum, a cancellation of Article 50, another election, election in the UK? What's their angle here? Because it seems like they're not doing themselves, you know, they're doing themselves a disservice if they really want to remain inside the EU. Right.
Well, first of all, I have to correct you on one point. It's not absolutely clear what the EU is going to do. Okay. The EU up to now is saying this. They have not received any request for an extension from Boris Johnson. They won't act until they receive a request for an extension. Boris Johnson says he won't make a request for an extension. There is some talk that there will be more legal challenges to try and force Boris Johnson to send this letter to apply for an extension next week. He could defy that decision. And of course, he has now something which he possibly didn't have a few weeks ago, which is the Conservative Party solidly behind him. So I think that may not be the thing that they will do. The other
how is the EU divided, real quick, Alexander?
Okay.
You have Macron and his guys. You have Merkel. How's it divided on this?
Okay. Let's just first of all go through the procedure. Now, the other possibility which is being talked about is that the Remaining majority in Parliament will then pass another amendment, which will effectively give John Bercow the option of sending this letter to ask for an extension to the EU. Now, there does seem to be a division within the EU. Macron has made it very clear he doesn't want an extension. Leo Varadkar, the Irish Prime Minister, doesn't want an extension. Merkel, however, clearly does. Merkel wants to put this off because she wants to keep Britain within the customs union. And as I discussed yesterday, this deal that Boris Johnson has negotiated doesn't in effect do that. So we are in a situation where the EU is divided. Now, it could be, if it's put to the vote in the EU Council, that Macron will veto it. We're going to do a video on this very soon, but Macron vetoed the accession of North Macedonia and Albania against Merkel's wishes a few days ago. He might be prepared, which is big news. He might be prepared to do this again, but we don't know that for sure, and it's not absolutely certain that it will happen. Now, let us assume, however, that it does, that sooner or later, in some form or other, this gets to the EU Council. There is a request for an extension, whether made by Boris Johnson or by John Bercow or by someone else, and the EU Council rejects it. What happens next? The Remainers are then, it seems to me, left in a very difficult position, which is that the only remaining card they have left to play is to move to revoke Article 50. In other words, to cancel Brexit entirely. And that may be a very difficult one for them. Now, I think that they probably game planned this. And I'm going to make a guess that what they're going to try to do next week is that sooner or later, in some form or other, they will unblock this process of putting this deal to the vote in the House of Commons. It seems Boris Johnson has a majority for this deal, but I think the Remainers are going to try to pass an amendment to force the deal first to be put to a referendum. I think that's the next step, and they're going to ask for an extension on that basis.
A referendum of what, though?
Well, a referendum of whether
Boris's deal or on Brexit all over again?
On Boris's deal. On Boris's deal and on referendum on Brexit all over again. So the option will presumably be Boris's deal or Remain. I mean, that seems to be the two alternatives. Now, I have to say, though, that the problem that faces is, first of all, it's not at all clear that there is a majority in the House of Commons for a referendum. But even if it is, a public opinion at the moment is running 2-1 in favour of accepting Boris's deal. So there is a lot left to play. We don't know whether that will happen. We don't know what view the EU will take of all of this. It's very, very uncertain at the moment what exactly is going to happen. But once again, we see the extraordinary lengths the Remainers are going to. And I passed on to you an article by Vernon Bogdanor, who is one of the country's leading constitutional experts, a professor of constitutional on these matters, a professor of politics and constitutional issues, I think in Oxford University. By the way, former teacher of David Cameron, our former Prime Minister, in which he has said very clearly that in his opinion, the Letwin law, the new Letwin decision that we've just seen, is unconstitutional. But of course, our current Supreme Court will never say that, because as we saw the other week, they will not take any step that goes against the Remainer majority in the House of Commons. So they are essentially trashing the Constitution more and more and more to prevent Brexit taking place. In the process, whatever fiction they had existed up to now, that it is a no-deal Brexit that they're opposing, is I think, being lost, and it's becoming increasingly clear that what they really oppose is Brexit at all.
All right, Pam Ryan asks, why did Johnson pull the vote?
Yes, I think he did entirely the right thing, incidentally, because of course, if he'd pulled the vote, there would just have been a vote, and it wouldn't have had any legal or real meaning. If he'd allowed the vote to proceed after the Letwin Amendment had been passed, he might have been found himself in a situation where he appeared to accept the validity of the Letwin Amendment, and he didn't want to do that. He now has a united party behind him, which he didn't before. So that puts him in some ways in a politically stronger position than he was previously.
Mm-hmm. This is, it's hard to even figure out where you go from here. I mean, what's Boris's next play?
Well,
what if he calls an election?
Well, he can't. This is the problem, because in order to call an election, he needs a 2/3 majority of the MPs in the House of Commons to vote for one. And we have seen that they repeatedly refuse to do so. They refuse to dissolve themselves and face the people. They refuse to pass any kind of Brexit law. They refuse to allow the government even to prorogue Parliament, except unless they, it seems, agree. And it's an extraordinary situation, as I said, one which I would never have imagined before in my lifetime. But as I said, it all basically comes down to the way in which the Speaker, John Bercow, is abusing, and I can't use any other word to describe it, his position. He, by the way, is due to retire on the 31st of October. So at that point, he will be gone, and we will see whether any new Speaker elected will take the same view.
Why is Bercow doing this?
Well, because he appears a fervid Remainer. I mean, he goes around, his car carries the sticker on it, which is bollocks for Brexit. He actually says that. I mean, it's his wife who put it there, but he's never taken the trouble, apparently, to take it off. He's never made any secret of the fact that he opposes Brexit.
How does this happen, Alexander, that you have a vote, 17.4 million people? Boris seems to, okay, whether you like the deal or not, Boris seems to have agreed on a deal with Juncker and the EU, and the EU seems to support it outside of Merkel and whoever else. They seem to support it. At least Juncker has come out and said in Tusk that they do support the deal. Yeah. It seems that Boris has the majority of the House. Yeah. Is that correct by saying he has the majority of the House who support his deal, or a large portion?
Yeah, we don't know this for absolute certainty, but can I just make a point? We did get one vote today, which is, of course, on the Letwin amendment. Now, Boris lost that vote by 16 votes. Now, that is the narrowest margin of defeat any Conservative government has suffered on a Brexit issue. It seems clear to me that opinion is swinging heavily within the House of Commons in his favour. And I'm going to make a guess that if there was a vote, if there had been a vote today on his deal, it would have passed. That is why the Letwin amendment was passed, because the Remainers knew that they couldn't defeat this deal openly. So they decided to use this procedural device to stop the vote happening, or rather to strip it of all legal significance.
My question is, how does this group, this relatively small group of Remainers, how are they essentially creating a hung government? I mean, they're not following the will of the people. The government is at an impasse. It can't do anything really.
Yeah, they're not.
I mean, really, it's stuck.
It is very.
And it's all at the hands of this small group of people. Is there? Can the Queen intervene?
Right, no, okay. First of all, it's important to stress it is not a small group of people. I mean, they may not be the majority, but they are not a small group of people. It is most of the establishment, the entire civil service, the whole of the judiciary, and many, many millions of people who oppose Brexit. I mean, we are a very profoundly divided country on this issue.
But in the House, what's the percent? I mean,
we don't know. We don't know. But I'm going to make a guess. I mean, most MPs, I reckon, out of 600 MPs, only 100 of them or so really want to see Brexit done. So the other 500 are basically Remainers, but they are not open Remainers. As one MP, Frank Field, who was a Labour MP, I think he's actually left the Labour Party, but I mean, he put it very well. He said you have all these Remainers who are pretend Brexiteers because they pretend that they want some fictitious, notional, nebulous Brexit deal, but in reality, they're doing everything they possibly can to stop it. Now, how are they able to do it? The reason they are doing it is because they are breaking the rules. Unfortunately, in Britain, because we do not have a written constitution, we do not have a proper rule book, but we do have the standing orders of the House of Commons, and the Speaker of the House of Commons is violating them. He is repeatedly doing so. As I said, this is the third time that he's set aside Standing Order number 14. And he's now making quite obvious that he is not going to allow the government to put forward its business to the House of Commons on Monday. So that is where the problem is. They're not supposed to be able to do this thing, but they are being able to do this thing because the anomaly of the British Constitution is that this power has been vested in the Speaker of the House of Commons, who is both irremovable and not subject to appeal.
The Queen, Alexander, can the Queen do anything?
I have said many times about the Queen, she will not interfere in parliamentary business. I think lots of people talk about the Queen. We must put the question of the Queen to one side. Ultimately, there are two powers that will decide this thing. One is the European Union. If the European Council decides to refuse an extension, then Boris Johnson's deal will pass. Because at that point, there is going to be such pressure on MPs that I can't imagine that they will allow a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. And I think far too many of them are too frightened of their voters to vote to revoke Article 50. If the European Council grants an extension, then of course all bets are off. The other great power ultimately is the British people. If they vote in an election for a government that has a majority and which is committed to seeing Brexit done, then Brexit will be done. But at this moment in time, that's not the situation we have.
Is it fair to say, Alexander, that what's happened today has basically ceded all power to the European Union?
Yes.
As far as what's going to happen with Brexit? I mean, from listening to you, it sounds that if the EU decides to grant an extension, great. You know, they keep the UK in some sort of orbit within the EU, it seems.
Yes.
Or at least they can negotiate with Boris for another 3 months and get even more concessions.
Yes.
If they don't grant the extension, then they're going to get Boris's deal. So no deal, a hard Brexit, WTO rules, from what I understand, is now completely off the table. I mean,
I have to
am I summing it up correctly?
Yes, I mean, I have to say this. I mean, it's now absolutely crystal clear that Boris Johnson is not working towards a no-deal Brexit. If the government doesn't want a no-deal Brexit, it's very difficult to see how it will happen. But going back to your original question, I'm not saying that the European Council, the EU, has all the power, because at least in theory, the House of Commons could move forward with the legislation next week, and we might be able, I mean, in theory, to see this whole thing through and done by the 31st of October. But it has far more power over this process than is healthy in a democracy. I mean, it is quite incredible to me that, as I said, members of Parliament and the Speaker of the House of Commons are ceding this decision to a great extent to the European Council. It baffles me that they should do this.
I'm having a hard time understanding it as well.
Well, I mean
it's
there is
a negotiation, and it seems
well,
like
it's not. No, it's not a. I mean, it's not really a negotiation.
Well,
I mean,
over the last 3 years, it just seems that you know every step that they take towards getting something out of this Brexit deal, I'm talking about the UK, it just seems that they take 2 steps back and just hand all the power to the EU.
Yes. Well, the point is, it's not a real negotiation. I mean, the only period of time when there's been a genuine negotiation throughout this entire process was the period of time after Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, when this month, when he started to talk with people like Macron. Well, he actually spoke to Macron in the UN General Assembly, and when he spoke to Vardika this October. This is the entire period when there has been a negotiation underway. We've had no negotiation before, and of course, the intention is to stop any negotiation taking place afterwards. Because what these people want to do is to stop Brexit. You spoke about them. How do they reconcile that with the fact that 17.4 million people voted for Brexit? They made it absolutely clear that for them, stopping Brexit overrides the will of those 17.4 million people. I have, as a Democrat, I'm not going to even talk about the enormous issues I have with that. I mean, it shocks and disturbs me, but I'm here to explain the situation. And that is how it seems to me. That is the attitude these people are taking. Now, and they're prepared, as we've seen, to break fundamental principles of our Constitution to stop it happening. And that's what we're seeing. Now, they don't want a negotiation. They don't want any kind of negotiation because they don't want to see Brexit happen at all.
Alexander, this is from Claire. This is actually an interesting question. I want to throw it at you. It says, Alex, please ask Alexander, what speech would he make now if he were Boris and determined to leave? And I'll even phrase it differently. What speech would you make now if you were Boris? Because you've said many times that Boris is not determined.
Yeah, I think he made a reasonably good speech today, actually. He basically said that he's not going to comply with the Ben Letwin law. And I think that's entirely right. I mean, you know, I've talked about this many times. I said that it was completely inappropriate. That law is unconstitutional. It should never have been passed. It's completely inappropriate that he should be compelled to ask for an extension, which he opposes. Over and above that, now that he has a deal in place, as he rightly said when he addressed the House of Commons today, why should he apply for an extension when he has already agreed a deal? It makes no sense at all. It makes absolutely no sense, especially if he believes, as he says, that he has the votes in the House of Commons to pass his deal. So I would have made a very similar speech today to the one that Boris Johnson has made. But I would have gone further. I would have said that these procedural devices are unconstitutional. I would have said that the Speaker's actions are wholly inappropriate and wrong. And I would have defied the Remainer majority to do its worst and to defy the will of the British people. I would have taken a stronger line, perhaps, than he has done. But of course, rhetorically speaking, doing that would have risked a further backlash and perhaps more extreme amendments next week. My own view is that that isn't perhaps a real danger, because I strongly suspect that we're going to see those extreme amendments anyway.
All right, before we get to the super chats, Alexander, what are the scenarios for a hard Brexit, a WTO Brexit to occur
right,
on the 31st?
Okay. As I said, I don't think it is a very plausible scenario now. But what are they? Let's say that Boris Johnson refuses to grant an extension. To apply for an extension. Let's say after a lot of toing and froing, the power to ask for an extension is then handed over to Bercow. Let's say that over the course of this week, probably around Wednesday or Thursday, he writes to the European Council seeking an extension. Let's say that Macron then refuses, vetoes an extension, and the European Council says that they will not grant an extension. Let us say then that in that kind of situation, Boris Johnson put his deal before them again, which he could still do, but the time to pass it before the European Parliament endorses it is gone, because the European Parliament must also pass this, must also agree to it. So let's assume that all of this fails, and a vote to revoke Article 50 also fails, which I think it probably would, by the way. In that kind of situation, in that kind of scenario, we would get a no-deal Brexit. It would not be something anybody would have willed, but it would have happened because all the various plans and plots and schemes that everybody is concocting would have in effect cancelled them out, and we would be left with a default situation, which is a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October. Macron, I think, by the way, can live with that. Merkel, by the way, can't.
And finally, Alexander, Brexit Party, Nigel Farage, what do you think's going through his mind?
Well, I think from his point of view, he understands very well that he's now needed more than ever, because can I just say, he of course opposes Boris Johnson's deal. He opposes Boris Johnson's deal because he is now quite clearly setting himself up as the supporter of a no-deal Brexit. The reason why Boris Johnson is Prime Minister, and the reason why Boris Johnson is proposing a deal which is different from Theresa May's deal, not radically different, but different in important respects, is because Nigel Farage set up the Brexit Party and swept the board in the European Council elections in May. If there is no Brexit done on the 31st of October, he is there holding the feet to the fire for the Labour Party in Northern England and for the Conservative Party everywhere else. And my own personal view, by the way, and I get to say this, is that sooner or later there will be a Brexit. I mean, it may not be soon, it may not be on the 31st of October, it may be 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 years away. But when it comes, if this Brexit deal isn't passed, it will be a much harder Brexit than the one we are seeing being proposed now. And that will largely be because of Nigel Farage. Hello, I've lost the sound. Can you hear me?
I'm back, sorry.
Sorry,
for a little bit.
Yes. I hope our viewers heard all of that.
No, I think they got you. One more question, Alexander. Corbyn, what's going through his mind?
Well, I think he's been in a dreadful position, but it's one he's manoeuvred himself into. I mean, I don't know Jeremy Corbyn personally, but I know lots of people who know him, and basically he doesn't like the European Union. He is surrounded by a parliamentary Labour Party that detests him, and by a parliamentary party that detests Brexit. He's got a membership that is also opposed to Brexit also. A really strong, self-confident leader would nonetheless have set his face against all of that and would have pushed for a proper Brexit, or at least a Brexit of some sort. Instead, weakly, he has gone along with the Remainer plots of people like Letwin and of people like Sir Keir Starmer, who is his Brexit shadow secretary. The result is, I think, that the Labour Party is losing support in Northern England and will almost certainly lose a general election if it comes. So we've gone from a situation where in June 2017, he looked like he was on the brink of power to one where he has basically lost that prospect. But he's not a very strong leader and he's not a good tactician. I mean, that's all I can say.
A lot of people in the chat are asking this question. I mean, you mentioned before too, the UK now seems very divided.
Yes.
How divided are things on the ground, Alexander?
Oh, I think they are very, very divided. I mean, if I may say, I mean, there are basically distinct regions in Britain. If you're talking about London, where I live, Remain opinion, Remain support is very, very strong in London. I mean, it is a big Remain stronghold. That's one reason, by the way, why Remainer protests like the one we've seen today outside Parliament are so much bigger than Leave protests. Is not because there are more Remain people than Leave people. It is because there are many, many more Remain people in London, and therefore they're able to mobilise for big protests much, much more easily. So London, which is a big part of the UK, is against Brexit. Scotland is against Brexit. Northern Ireland is against Brexit. The rest of England and Wales are very strongly for Brexit. That is a major division. And when we talked about a 52-48% split in the referendum, the very latest really detailed poll was done by a polling agency called Comrees. It suggests that the votes now would be 54% for Brexit, 46% for Leave. So contrary to what some people are thinking, the drift is further towards leave, but 46% is still a very large number of people. Some of them, as we've seen, are very fervid about this issue. And of course, the establishment, the judiciary, the civil service, the business community are all overwhelmingly pro-Remain.
All right, and before I get to the super chats, one more question, Alexander. Yesterday, we discussed a lot about Northern Ireland and how you saw that Boris's deal seemed to have, I guess, for lack of a better word, sold out Northern Ireland, turned its back on Northern Ireland. What's the situation now with Northern Ireland? How do you think they're looking at what went down today?
Well, I think there's still an awful lot of heart searching, but the important point to make is that the Democratic Unionist Party refused to support the government in the vote today. And one of their leaders, Nigel Dodds, spoke very, very fiercely against Boris Johnson. They are very, very upset and angry. Now, of course, the point to make is that, of course, Northern Ireland is not a monolith. 40% of the, 45 plus percent of the population of Northern Ireland, which is nationalist and wants union with the South, supports Boris Johnson's deal. And I suspect quite a lot of Protestants are now probably coming round to it too. Bear in mind, Northern Ireland voted Remain. So I don't think that Boris Johnson's decision to cut Northern Ireland off is reversible, irrespective of what happens over Brexit. I think now we are going to move further and faster towards a united Ireland. I mean, that is still my view. It was my view yesterday. It is my view now.
Are there any mechanisms, Alexander, in the British government and for Boris Johnson to call some sort of like state of emergency or something to break this impasse just very quickly? Is there anything in the Constitution that has that in there?
Yeah, I tell you why, and I tell you what the problem is. Of course, there are you're going to come up with all kinds of procedural devices, but the Supreme Court, as we know, decided 2 weeks ago that any decision the government makes has to be lawful according to its views. And any kind of device like that, which the government uses, the Supreme Court now, following on the logic of its previous judgment, with which, by the way, let me repeat, I strongly disagree, but that's the view they took. They will simply rule it out as unlawful. And again, because we don't have a written constitution, it's very, very difficult to see how that can be simply and straightforwardly overridden. The only definite way that this could work is if there was an election with a strong Brexit, pro-Brexit majority, a government with a strong Brexit, committed to Brexit, winning a strong majority. Now that may very well happen sooner or later, but again, the Remainers in Parliament are using every procedural device left to them to put that off. I mean, we are in a terrible mess in Britain because we have, and this is not, by the way, just over Brexit. Over the last couple of years, going back to Tony Blair's time, we have done major damage to our constitution. We set up a Supreme Court without thinking through its implications and without basically creating any kind of written constitution to basically adapt to that. We changed the way in which elections are called in order to suit the political needs of the Liberal Democratic Party when they joined the Conservative Party in forming a coalition government. So that wasn't done with any real foresight or any proper thinking. And of course, we've left the Speaker of the House of Commons with extraordinary power, and he is now abusing it to change the House of Commons rules as he wishes. Now, this is huge damage to our constitution, which has been done over many years. I would also add, by the way, that what we're also seeing is a gross abuse of the process of judicial review. Judicial review is the mechanism whereby the courts are entitled to review government decisions to decide whether they are lawful or not. Now, that was, I used to be a great person supporting judicial review, and intrinsically I still am, but we are now looking at the courts using judicial review to actually second guess political decisions, not instead of administrative ones, which is incredibly dangerous. So that is why Gina Miller is able to get her decisions considered all the way up by the Supreme Court, and Robin Holbrooke is not.
All right, from Claire Alexander, can we conclude that an unwritten constitution is therefore a bad thing?
Well, I think if you're going to start playing with your constitution in the way that is being done, and you have a Supreme Court which is basically, I get to say, frankly, prepared to make up the rules as it wishes and as it goes along, then of course a written constitution becomes an essential thing, because then you anchor everything in a proper written document. I have to say there are problems with written constitutions. I mean, we see the political crisis that the United States is going through. It's not a solution to every problem, but we cannot go on like this. We cannot have a situation where a group of people in Parliament are basically making the country increasingly ungovernable because they are obsessed with a particular issue and are not willing to allow any kind of redress to take place.
All right, let's get to some super chats, Alexander. From Emil Ressman, 20 SEK super chat. Hello from Sweden. Hello, Emil. How are you? And thank you for that super chat. From Simon Alexander, £5 super chat. Can Boris invoke the 2004 Civil Contingencies Act to get Brexit through?
Well, again, one can see how that might be possible. And I mean, there are, as I say, I come back to this, there are all kinds of procedural devices that might make that possible. There are other arguments, by the way. Jacob Rees-Mogg has floated this idea that if there's a deal done between the European Union and the British government, and that is ratified by the European Parliament, that is legally binding, irrespective of what Parliament decides, because EU law supersedes British law. Once upon a time, I would have said these kind of legal arguments carry a great deal of force. If you have courts that consistently strike them down and say these things are unlawful, then of course you're in completely different legal territory, because you may think these laws mean certain things, but you can no longer rely on them anymore. Can I just say something? Going beyond any question of Brexit itself, the thing that worries me most about this whole process is the way in which our constitution is being trashed. It's some people, in their obsession to stop Brexit, are burning everything down. It was entirely possible to have a vote today in the House, a meaningful vote, as it's called today, on Brexit, on Boris Johnson's deal or not. You could either vote for it or you could vote against it. But rather than take that straightforward and honest and legal and constitutional approach, you have the Speaker of the House of Commons setting aside standing orders in order to pass an amendment which is intended to make a perfectly proper and meaningful vote no longer have carry any legal weight. Now, how can you justify that? I don't see you can. That seems to me both dishonest and completely wrong. And it is trashing our entire constitutional settlement. And, it's going to cause damage far beyond Brexit. I mean, as somebody who worked for many years, in the constitutional and civil justice system, this really worries me. It amazes me it doesn't worry more people.
Why the F did they have Boris Johnson sitting there negotiating, and even Theresa May negotiating, and all this stuff going on for so long when you were just going to get to this outcome? And it's like they wasted, all of Boris Johnson's time.
Well, it did. Well, I mean, the point was
get a deal, negotiate a deal.
Well,
so he negotiates a deal, whether you like it or not, as you said, doesn't matter. He brought a deal. And this was the result. The only deal they would have accepted, Alexander, was, hey, guys, we decided to remain.
Exactly. Well, you put it precisely. I mean, this is the whole dishonesty of it. It is the ultimate dishonesty behind the original Ben Letwin law that was passed in September, because as we discussed yesterday in our live, that was entirely predicated on the assumption that Boris Johnson would not come before the House of Commons with a deal. They were astonished when he did come before the House of Commons with a deal. And then when he did come before the House of Commons with a deal, instead of simply and straightforwardly voting against it, which is what Oliver Letwin doesn't have the courage to do, they pass a new law which is intended to prevent him putting it forward. I mean, you know, it seems to me there comes a point where this kind of thing is going to have very serious consequences. And I'm not talking about a revolution tomorrow. I'm absolutely not supporting uprisings or anything of that kind. But if you want to destabilize your own country, they're going about it the right way.
Yeah, they're doing a very good job. All right. Super chat from JC, 199. Thank you, JC, for that super chat. From Dr. Manu, super chat, 30 euros. Thank you, Dr. Manu, for that super chat. We really appreciate it.
Yes.
From JC, another super chat, 199 pounds. Is it possible for those to revoke Article 50, for those that to revoke Article, I guess it means for those that are Remainers to revoke Article 50. Is it possible?
Absolutely. And I would not be at all surprised if at some point over the next few weeks, next 2 weeks, we see something like that happening. I mean, I don't personally think it will happen, but how can I be sure that it won't? It's entirely possible that we could have a proposal made to the House of Commons to revoke Article 50. It would almost certainly require another change to the rules. In other words, Burqa once again setting aside the House of Commons' standing orders, because it's inconceivable that Boris Johnson would ever propose a motion to that effect. But it's entirely possible that someone like Letwin or Hilary Benn or someone like that might propose it. It's entirely possible that Burqa will once again change the rules to allow it to be put forward. And it is possible, though I think unlikely, that the Remainer majority in Parliament could pass it. So, you know, let's not rule out that possibility at all.
Unbelievable. All right, from PN Woods, a $10 super chat. Many thanks for your clarity. Thank you, PN Woods, for that super chat. From James Hurley, a $50 super chat. Thanks for your great coverage of Brexit. Here's to 100K subscribers. Thank you, James, for that generous super chat. We really appreciate it. And guys, thank you, James. You also reminded me, hit that like button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and share the channel with everybody you know. Help us get to 100K. Thank you once again, James. From Jean Doe, the second £2 super chat. Boris sucks Jacob Rothschild's knob. Google it.
Well, can I just say, I mean, an important point I want to make. I mean, I'm always worried. I'm very worried by some of the things people say about Boris Johnson. I mean, it seems to me that, like him or not dislike him, there is a Boris Johnson derangement syndrome at work with some people and in Britain, and that is causing a lot of damage. I personally don't like him very much, and I've heard people who've known him talk about, you know, the fact that he's a fairly duplicitous individual, that he's clever, but in a rather facile way, and we've seen how he sold out the Northern Irish. But we have to look beyond personalities at the fundamental principles at stake here. The fundamental principles at stake, it seems to me, are very clear. Firstly, there is the democratic one, which is that 17.4 million people voted for Brexit. Now, you may agree with that decision, or you may not, but that was how they voted. And if you're a Democrat, you uphold it. The second is you have to look at how the British Constitution is supposed to work. If you're going to constantly change your rules in order to stop something that 17.4 million people voted for, as I said, there will be consequences. We should put aside our feelings about Boris Johnson and focus on these important things.
Okay, from basically well-fed, £1 super chat. Thank you for that. Basically well fed. We appreciate it. From Reality Check, £1.99 super chat. This is plotting on a Shakespearean level. You've quoted Shakespeare many times when we've done Brexit videos and live streams, Alexander.
Well, indeed so. I mean, tis a tale of sound and fury, told by an idiot, but unfortunately not signifying nothing to misquote Shakespeare. Shakespeare has a quote for almost every situation, and you could come up with lots and lots and lots of them here. That's Cry right. Havoc and let slip the dogs of war. That might be another one before very long, but I hope it's up to that.
All right, from Maureen Johnstone, £9.99 super chat. MPs waging stop until Brexit happens. Let democracy win. Enough is enough. UK is becoming a laughing stock.
Absolutely. I mean, that's another major concern that I have. I mean, at the end of the day, what kind of an impression does that give the rest of the world that Britain, the oldest constitutional monarchy and government in the world, with, as it likes to pretend to itself, the mother of parliament and all that. I mean, I've never liked that kind of language. That's what the British like to talk about. What kind of impression does it give that it cannot manage its own arrangements properly? I mean, this is a constitutional crisis that is making Britain increasingly look like Ukraine. And I don't mean that as a compliment.
All right, from
Ukrainians, forgive me.
Yeah. We have a video on Ukraine coming up soon too, within the week. All right, from John Doe II, £5 super chat. Look for Joe Cox's death record on Kirkless Council website. It doesn't exist. They faked her death. Her birth record is still open.
No, I have to say, I know for an absolute fact that she was killed, and it was killed in a most terrible way. And by the man who did it, by the way, was definitely a person with very severe mental problems and a very dangerous individual. So let's not go down that route, and let's please avoid any kind of violence like that. By the way, there were some very ugly scenes outside the House of Commons, outside Parliament today, and government ministers, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, had to be escorted out of the House of Commons by the police to protect them from some Remainer crowds. I mean, I don't know that there would have been actual violence if the police had not been there, but it was a pretty ugly incident.
Remainers are upset.
There was Remainers. I mean, there was some. I mean, this is how ugly the mood has become, and I have to say, seeing all of that, I find that very disturbing.
Okay, from Boundless Energy, a €10 super chat. Are we witnessing the beginning of a smaller civil war, similar to the situation in the US? Good question as we're talking about right now.
Again, I sincerely and devoutly hope not, but I will repeat again, if you want to destabilize your own country, some people are going about it the right way. If you set aside or disregard the vote of 17.4 million people and repeatedly change your constitution in order to do that, then there may be consequences, and those consequences may be unhappy.
Okay. From Sparky, Parliament is in scorched earth mode and would rather leave the UK a smoking crater than leave the EU.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, they are, as I said, smashing their own constitution. I mean, and they're doing it in a way that really it's not thought through. If you want, I mean, I want to make this point here. I mean, the British Constitution has many, many defects. I'm not here to defend it. I don't pretend that it was an ideal system before, that it worked, perfectly. There were lots and lots of things wrong with it. But if you're going to change it, go about it in a proper way. Think through what you're doing. Don't just do it in this piecemeal fashion, breaking your own rules in order to prevent something happening which you don't like. I understand that some people don't want Brexit to happen, but there are, as I said, greater, more overarching principles at stake than Brexit itself, and destabilizing Britain itself in order to stop Brexit seems to me a crazy thing to do. I'm going to add something else. I mean, I don't understand it anyway, because I don't understand why the European Union is such a tremendous cause. You're prepared to destabilize your own country over, but there's an awful lot of things about this that I don't really understand.
Okay, from Graham Murphy, a couple super chats. UK government sent a booklet to every household explaining Brexit before the referendum. It's a lie that people didn't know what Brexit meant. Leave means leave.
Absolutely, I'm entirely of that view. I think that puts it succinctly and correctly. Of course it does. The British government said in that leaflet, which I received and read at the time, that if they voted leave, the government would implement it. And after the referendum, most of these people who are now clearly trying to prevent Brexit happening said they would ensure that Brexit did happen. And in the June 2017 election, all of the various parties, at least the Labour and Conservative parties, also said that they would enable Brexit. So all these promises, and we see what they mean. Again, I come back to what I said. If you break promises like that, if you rip up your own constitution, don't be surprised if there are consequences.
Okay, from Zilla, 10 euro super chat. You never talk about the ideological side of EU's creation. So important to understand what's going on in 2019 about the EU's hidden father, Richard Gudenhoff-Kalergi. Talk about him, please.
Well, I think you know an awful lot more about this than I do, to be quite honest. I mean, I'm going to make an admission here, which is that much of my life I was a supporter of what has now become the European Union. I mean, I very strongly supported the European Economic Community as it was in the 1970s. I tended to discount the idea that the EU was evolving into a super state or anything like that. I accept, and I don't know enough about the subject to really be able to talk about it, that there were almost certainly, shall we say, Europeanist tendencies behind this project from the outset. But they have now grown over the last 20 years and taken on an extraordinary life. I am not going to discuss all that now. I think a historical discussion of that nature would be a very long and lengthy one. I would need to know an awful lot more, or to have read an awful lot more about it than I have. And at this moment in time, the issue is Brexit in Britain, and that is already a very big one.
Okay, from Helgvad, a DKK 200 super chat. Thank you for that super chat, Helgvad. From Einar 5855, 499 super chat. Sky News just reported that Boris Johnson will tell the EU he doesn't want a Brexit delay.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson justify the Ben Act. You've talked about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to say, I mean, that's the line he's taking. I mean, he's defying the Remainers. And I mean, I think he's right. I mean, given the position he's in or has been put in, I think for him to accede to this law would be completely wrong. Parliament, as I said, if people don't want to pass this deal in Parliament, they have a right to vote against it. Going for these kind of devices seems to me completely wrong. When, as I said, and dishonest also. I mean, I've explained why I think that earlier in this program, and I think that Boris Johnson once again is calling the Remainer bluff by taking this position. If they want to try and put him in prison for contempt of court because he's not going to comply with the I think unconstitutional Ben Letwin law, then so be it. And as I said, taking those kind of steps in this kind of situation will again, as I said, have consequences.
Okay, from Sparky Super Chat, $5. Aside from guarding against fine print and clauses subject to interpretation, no deal Brexit avoids all this drama. It gets it over and done with. Well,
we've discussed this, Alex and I, many times. I don't personally believe that the no deal Brexit would be the calamity, the economic calamity that people talk about. I mean, people talk about it as if it would be a biblical collapse. I mean, I've never taken any of that seriously, and it would leave the UK open to form its own arrangements, including, incidentally, to negotiate whatever future free trade arrangements with the EU it wants. But I come back to what I said before. It's not the deal, clearly, that Boris Johnson wants. Back in early September, when the Ben Letwin law was going through Parliament, I said at the time he didn't seem to be fighting it, and he didn't. He clearly wants a deal. He's clearly got a deal. This is the deal that he's putting to the House of Commons. If the deal is passed before the 31st of October and we leave on that basis, then to be absolutely clear, it's not over, because there would still be more negotiation coming after that. So that might be a scenario no deal Brexit would avoid, but it's not the scenario we're facing.
Okay, from Sam McDonald, 229 euro super chat. Chance Boris requests an extension and EU says no.
Well, he said he's not going to, and I'm sure that's the position he's going to take. My own personal view is that if he asked for an extension, the EU would grant it. But he's not going to ask for an extension. So that puts the EU, oddly enough, in a rather more complicated and difficult position. If he won't ask for an extension, and a request for an extension is made by Bercow, who is not the Prime Minister, do they grant it or do they not? Merkel will want to. Macron might not. We have to see whether Macron is prepared to defy Merkel on this.
All right, from Com77, 9.99 pound super chat. Keep up the good work, guys. It's a fantastic channel. Thank you very much for that super chat. From Happy Cat, $2 super chat. Thank you very much, Happy Cat, for that super chat. And the final super chat, Alexander, comes from Sparky. Remainers in Parliament and the bureaucracy are a mixture of people on the take from globalist robber barons and useful idiots. It explains their logic.
Well, absolutely. The trouble is, some of them are not idiots. I mean, Oliver Letwin is an extremely clever man who has misused his intelligence, in my opinion, in an extraordinary course. As I've said before, I don't understand this ideological fervour these people have, because I simply don't share it. It frankly baffles me that they would, as I said, be willing to do so much damage to the British Constitution, defy 17.4 million people, and, as I said, create a potential for destabilisation in Britain, or in pursuit of this cause. I mean, I don't understand it at all. But there we are. If you want to get a sense of what these people are like, there is an extraordinary article today in The Guardian, which is an arch-remaining newspaper, by one of their leading commentators called Jonathan Friedland, in which he sets out clearly the anguish he feels if Britain leaves the European Union. As I said, I don't understand that kind of feeling, but you have it set out there.
All right, there it is. Alexander, any last words before we wrap it up?
Yeah, this is not over. And as I said, we mustn't assume that there isn't going to be a Brexit on the 31st of October. I mean, all, as I said, is in play. We've seen a big play today. Boris Johnson said, to use his words, that he's undismayed and undaunted. And we will see how far the Remainers go. I have to say that he also made some points when he spoke at the House of Commons, that he seemed to think that the EU would probably refuse a request for an extension. And I do wonder whether perhaps he has again reached some kind of understanding on this question with Macron. We will see what happens. But what a humiliating situation, as you correctly said, Alex, that the future of this question of Brexit is now being ceded not to the EU, but to the President of France.
Wow.
Macron. Macron. I mean, really.
The irony of all ironies.
I mean, it's beyond belief, actually. It beggars belief. Yeah.
All right. Here's one final super chat, Alexander, from Simon. Could Alex outline the long-term consequences for Remainers and the main political parties of this crisis? That's a good question
Well, that's
to
a very,
close out this live. What's the long-term?
Well, I mean, first of all, at some point there has to be an election. And with opinion in Britain being very, very strong on Brexit at the moment, and with the vast majority of parliamentary constituencies having voted for leave, there could very, very well be an electoral wipeout. So, I mean, the Labour Party could find itself in serious trouble. So there is that, but I think a more realistic danger for the short term is that we could be without a government. We could find ourselves in a situation where the Remainers are too frightened to actually revoke Article 50, where we would have no real government going forward. And the only solution is some kind of a referendum, which the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has publicly opposed, by the way. He says that there needs to be an election before a referendum. You can make whatever sense you like. Well, I can actually see the sense of that. That's a whole other discussion. We won't talk about it now. But I mean, we could find ourselves in a situation where, as I said, people get more and more angry with a situation that has no real exit. I mean, no real parliamentary exit, no real political exit within Britain itself. And sooner or later, something will have to give. And I fear that may not have a very happy outcome. I don't know what form it could take. But and I don't want to sort of appear to be suggesting anything. But we could end up in a situation where the country becomes completely ungovernable, and that would be a disaster.
Okay, and final super chat, Alexander. Boris or Nigel as PM? Simple question.
Well, at the end of the day, Nigel isn't going to become PM anytime soon. I mean, this is something I think we need to understand. I mean, if this whole thing is put off until 2022, when the next election is supposed to happen, and we have one procedural device after another used to stop Brexit happening, and we see a deepening political crisis here with a government that's unable to govern. And I think Nigel Nigel for PM starts to look like a much more likely possibility. I mean, give it time. As I said, again, if Remainer, we talked with the previous question, what would be the implications of that? What would be the implications for Remainers? Well, that's fine.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. All these actions have consequences.
All these actions have consequences. Bad actions always do. Can I just take now the situation in France as an example? The French people voted against the Lisbon Treaty in a referendum. And I had a visitor from France today. In fact, she stayed several days. And she told me that, you cannot understand the anger that is driving the Gilets jaunes protests without taking into account the way that referendum result was simply set aside.
Well put. Well put. All right, guys, make sure you hit that like. Make sure you subscribed if you're not subscribed. Share the channel. PayPal, Patreon, subscribe star, please donate. We really appreciate the donations. We also appreciate it when you share the channel and spread the word about the Duran, and of course, the duranshop.com to get our merchandise. That also helps this channel. Alexander, let's sign off for tonight. Very quickly from Goberwala wants to know your quick thoughts. Very quick, Alexander. We're signing off on this. Tulsi and Hillary, what did you make of what Tulsi said? And what
Alex has done a brilliant video on this, which I strongly advise people to watch. My own personal views very quickly. It exposed the kind of person Hillary Clinton is. I mean, I find her comments about Tulsi absolutely poisonous. I find the paranoia of Hillary on the subject of Russia, frankly, bizarre. And I found Tulsi's responses absolutely outstanding. And I'm going to make a personal guess, which is that it's going to work in Schulz's favour. And I would not be surprised, I'm not predicting it, I don't know enough about American politics to say, but I would not be surprised if come the primaries, we could start to see upsets, the Democratic Party primaries. We could start to see upsets where Hillary is concerned, where Tulsi is concerned. That doesn't mean that I expect to see Tulsi become the Democratic Party's candidate in the election in 2020. I wish, but I am a realist, and I don't realistically expect that. But I mean, I was appalled by Hillary Clinton's comments. I was not surprised by them at all. The person who gloated over Gaddafi's torture and death in the way that she did, let's remember, she said, we saw he died after he had been publicly tortured and humiliated and then brutally killed. All I will say is, it doesn't surprise me. And as I said, we saw the mask fall. We saw it again, the mask fall. Yeah.
Very well said, Alexander. All right, guys, we have some great...
Yes. People should see your video on this. It is a very, very good one.
Yeah, I think Goberwala wanted to hear your take on it. He decided he wanted to hear your take on it.
It's a very good video, if I may say.
And we have a lot of videos coming up this week, Alexander, the stories that we're following. I know we should definitely cover the Canadian elections. Actually, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with Trudeau, because I think it's going to signal a lot of what's going on with the globalist, nation state type of pull that's happening now in the world.
Absolutely.
And I'm very curious to see if Trudeau comes out on top or not. I hope he doesn't, but let's see. And what else do we have going on in the news, Alexander?
I mean, there's heaps going on. I mean, there's got more and more on Russiagate all the time. And I expressed certain views about what's going to happen with Biden right at the start of this program. I expect there are going to be more revelations about all of that. I suspect that we're going to see the Horowitz report coming out very soon, probably this week.
Probably like Wednesday, Thursday.
Thursday, exactly. So obviously we'll be covering all of that. We're also going to be looking more and more at the situation in the Middle East, with this very complicated situation now between Turkey and the United States, between Turkey and Russia, between all of these countries and Syria. Though I do believe, and I really do believe, that we are now finally in the end game where Syria is concerned. So all kinds of things are going on. I mean, the world is a very interesting and very complicated place.
And we have to take a look at what's going on in Ukraine.
Zelensky
is starting to look a little shaky.
Absolutely. I think that the weaknesses that were there always in the Zelensky project are now becoming increasingly visible. And go on.
Yeah, and we have a Macron video where I think you mentioned that Macron, and this is related to Brexit.
Absolutely.
So everybody listen up to what Alexander's going to say. Macron has vetoed Angela Merkel's wishes. So.
Yeah, I know. He has. He vetoed them on North Macedonia and Albania. And can I just add, by the way, that our own former Prime Minister, Mr. Tsipras, a person about whom my feelings are unsayable and unprintable, so not surprisingly, has been writing articles in the Financial Times supporting Merkel's position. So there we are. Yeah, but we will certainly be covering that. Macron has shown that he's prepared to defy Merkel, and he's prepared to veto things that she wants. So he's becoming increasingly assertive against her and emboldened. And though I am confident that sooner or later he will trip and come to a bad end. He's doing it in pursuit of an objective, which I personally think is misguided and wrong and ultimately disastrous. It is nonetheless interesting that is what he's doing. So we will certainly be covering what Macron is up to.
All right. Okay.
And who knows if he vetoes a Brexit extension?
That's what I was going to say.
There we are.
Yeah, that will solidify the split between Merkel and Macron.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, I mean, it will be a decisive event. It will mark the final end of Queen Merkel of Europe.
Yeah. That's right. King Macron of Europe. Ugh.
King. Well,
I don't even like to say those words.
He will no doubt say Emperor Emmanuel Macron, the Great of Europe, but we will see.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
I'm not going to
sleep.
Okay. All right. Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London. Thank you very much, Alexander, for your insight on Brexit. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this live stream. We hope you have a good Saturday evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and have a great weekend, whatever is left of it. Take care, everybody. Have a good night.